Hello, this discussion is about nuclear deterrence. What is deterrence? Remember, art provides four uses of military force: deterrence, compellence, defense, swagger. Deterrence is defined most economically by Glenn Snyder as the power to dissuade. We have Alexander George and Smoke's definition, as well as Thomas Schelling, who is arguably the greatest theorist on nuclear weapons. Schelling calls deterrence a threat, intended to keep an adversary from doing something, the capacity to inflict hurt. So as you review the capability of nuclear weapons, while they might, as we are experiencing, there are other forces in the world that can impact a significant amount of hurt, such as biological or chemical weapons. Nuclear weapons, because of their tactical use, what I mean in that context is their specific targeting, as well as enormous destructive capability, generates deterrence. Now, we think about this is deterrence is not limited to nuclear issues. Deterrence can be generated by states in other contexts and other methods. But nuclear deterrence is one that has been widely studied. It's argued by many states that, within their documentation, that suggests this is a possession of nuclear capability. It also goes to nuclear modernization. So if we look at the material generated by the United Kingdom and the United States, both consistently say nuclear modernization is essential to establishing and continuing deterrence. There are two dimensions by which deterrence can be examined that produces four scenarios. One is the location of force projection. So where is the territorial dispute, or where is the instance where deterrence needs to be applied geographically? The next is the time period. So there's direct, immediate deterrence. Direct means a specific territory and a specific threat, and a close time proximity. So in this context, we would think of a reaction to or against the actions of another state. There's direct general deterrence, which means that you would have direct specific time, but it would not necessarily have a specific location, but it would not necessarily have a specific time period. It's just present. Here we frequently think of the exchanges and interactions between the Soviet Union and the United States and Europe during the Cold War. Next, you think of extended immediate deterrence, which is probably a better fit for the Cold War, is that you think of it in a forward operating environment or a place distinct from the geographic location. Here we think about the deployment of U.S. nuclear weapons to other states, or nuclear umbrella, maybe not necessarily the weapons, but the threat of capability provided to another state. So in this context, we might think of Japan and the United States. Japan, though nuclear weapons have been in ports under certain conditions, we think through, they would say that it's extended immediate deterrence because the deterrence is generated by the United States, so to speak, on behalf of Japan. General deterrence success occurs when prevents state leaders from issuing military threats and actions that escalate peacetime diplomatic and military competition into a crisis. So when can force projection of nuclear capability help de-escalate an otherwise escalating situation? Huth also provides immediate deterrence, preventing state leaders who have already threatened a force or military confrontation from resorting to large-scale use of the military. So we think about these two definitions about immediate and general deterrence. One is events are happening. The other, there has to be a specific provocation. Who uses deterrence? Well, arguably the major powers often use extended immediate deterrence in many cases. It would provide for nuclear capabilities. U.S. nuclear deterrent policy. NATO does share nuclear weapons. There are dual keys, right, so multiple stakeholders. The estimated time to use, however, from the time they start debating to the time that they do it, is anywhere between 60 and 120 days. And that is because of the complicated veto structure in NATO. We think about an expanded European Union. The EU and NATO are obviously not the same, but the decision-making process becomes more convoluted because you have to have, there's more stakeholders. And then finally, you have to have a compatibility between the delivery system and the weapon provided. Huth's article in the Annual Review of Political Science argues that there are four influences to deterrent effectiveness: the balance of military forces, costly signaling and bargaining behavior, reputation, and the interest at stake. We think about the balance of military forces. Here we think of conventional military capability. Deterrence is going to be more effective when there is imbalance in favor of the country trying to generate deterrence with its nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons and conventional forces are correlated and connected in incredibly important ways when we think about deterrence generation. We think about how to signal the opposing side in a bargaining behavior. Costly signaling, in this case, not just simply saying, oh, we'll use weapons. This could be in nuclear context, deploying weapons forward, making sure mounting weapons into delivery vehicles, demonstrating or flying within close proximity of someone's airspace with a nuclear armed capability. These are costly gestures that help signal to the other side the seriousness and the tone of the other country. Next, you can have reputation. This gets interesting, in my opinion, when we think about a state's reputation and a leader's reputation within a state. So, for example, in the United States publishes its nuclear posture. It's one of the few states that do. And so other states can identify when nuclear weapons can be used. Well, what about the actual leader that's in the White House? Does it matter whether it's the Bush administration, the Obama administration, or the Trump administration? That is a reputational question that is interesting to study and identify variation. And then finally, we have to think about deterrent effectiveness with the issue at stake. The more central the issue to national security of a particular state, arguably the more the state will care about it, and the more that deterrence may be effective. And then finally, we have a question for you. This is discussion board question number 7. So you copy this and go answer it. Do nuclear weapons still, or ever, generate deterrence? I want you to wrestle with that question about the changing nature of nuclear weapons, changing nature of the international system, and the fact that nuclear weapons have only been used once in a conflict. Now, you may say, oh, well, of course they generate deterrence. Well, if that's the position you take, maybe argue the other side. Because there is a debate that nuclear weapons don't generate deterrence because they're not used. It's a little more complicated than that, but think through it. Do nuclear weapons still, or ever, generate deterrence? Thanks.